Hello everybody and welcome to the third part of the light tank build. I am going to hand paint this because a lot of people keep asking for tips on how to hand paint. I am not the best hand painter. With that in mind, I'm just basically going to just go through how I like to approach it. First of all, before we do anything, you're going to want a paintbrush. Ideally, you're going to want a paintbrush that is large enough to cover the areas that you're working on. So, you wouldn't want to use something like this. It's too small. You don't need expensive brushes, but you do want soft bristles. That's going to help cut down on brush strokes a bit. And before we put paint on this, just a couple things how I like to prepare my paint. You don't want to be too thick. There's two ways to look at thickness. There's the thickness of the paint and how much you have on the brush. So straight out of the bottle, if you were to load your brush up and paint, you're going to have ridges along the outsides and the sides building up. So it's going to force you to keep working it to try to get it smooth. And it's going to take a while to do that. So what I tend to like to do is, first of all, load the brush up, but try to get as much excess off as I can so that when I do a stroke, it's thin. So you have to do a few extra passes, but you don't get as many ridges in the paint like you do if it's too thick. So that's thickness of how much paint is on the brush. The other thing I do like to do is thin the paint a little bit. Not much. What I do is I use a mixture. I think it's about 75% water, 25% flow improver. All flow improver is an additive that breaks the surface tension. If you add water, water has a good amount of surface tension. So if you add water to acrylic paints, you actually run the risk of introducing surface tension, more so than the paint actually might have. So the flow improver just helps break that surface tension. Some people I've heard use hand soap, just a dot of hand soap. Haven't tried it myself. If anybody has, leave a comment, let me know how it works. But it doesn't take much either. So there's my little pot of paint. I really just add a couple drops and that's it. Doesn't take much. And that'll actually thin the paint out quite a bit, or at least get to a point where, to me, it flows better. That's just me. That's how I like to do it. I'm sure lots of people have their own ways, their own styles, but yeah. So that's how I like to prepare the paint. So for this, I'm just going to use a olive drab base. I'm going to basically paint just about the whole thing, except the tracks maybe. It is primed. We can get into whether primers needed or not needed. I tend to use it because it gives me a nice uniform base on which to paint. If you don't prime, that's perfectly fine. I know a lot of people who don't. I often won't prime for smaller parts, but I will prime for the whole kit. I'll do a video on primers, strictly on primers at some point in the future, but for now that should suffice. That's why I prime. Again, you don't have to, but I like to. So just gonna put a little bit of paint in here. Not sure how much I'm gonna need. It should be enough, I hope. If not, I'll just make some more. And again, I'll put a couple drops. Just a little bit in there. You don't want it too thin. I mean, you're not thinning it like for an airbrush. You're just trying to increase the flow properties of it. And if you did thin it a little bit too much, just add a little extra paint in there. So we're gonna, again, load the brush, but not too much. And then really, I just go at it. I start painting. You're gonna notice that your first layers might be a little thin. That's perfectly okay, because you're gonna probably do more than one coat anyways. One of the nice things about modern paints, especially acrylics, is they're very kind to brush painters. They tend to have a self-leveling property, which basically means, as long as you don't overwork it, meaning don't brush it too much or continue to brush when it's getting dry. If you just get it on there and let it sit, it will actually level itself out quite a bit all by itself. Again, if it's too thick and you add some of that flow improver, that's what that does, is it breaks the surface tension, lets it self level. quite a bit. So I'm just going to do this over the entire tank, and we'll be right back. So here we are, just the finishing touches on the first coat, trying to get it all inside this running gear area. Now, a lot of people will actually do this before putting the tracks on. Some will even do this before putting the running gear on. Again, it's personal preference. It definitely is easier. I can definitely see that. I tend to build and then paint all at once. It doesn't bother me to have to work around that stuff. But if you find it too much of a challenge or too much of a pain, by all means, paint it as you go. Paint it in stages. Yeah, whatever floats your boat. That's the thing about this hobby, is you just do it your way. Whatever makes you happy, whenever makes you comfortable. That's all that matters. So, there's the first coat. And as I said, let me get some parts here. I want to try and get everything covered as much as you can in the first coat. Sometimes you will miss and you have to go back, but that's all right. It happens. So, as you can see, the first coat isn't the prettiest. There's some thin spots, there's some good covered spots. And if you leave it like that, yeah, it's not going to look so hot. But if you let this dry, now it doesn't have to be dry all the way, it literally can just be tacky. You just don't want it wet. You don't want a second coat to go over a wet base coat, because then you're just going to be overworking the paint. And as soon as you start overworking the paint, bad things happen. It's just how it is. If you don't know what I mean by overworking, you keep brushing so much that the paint is actually starting to dry while you're painting. And you will definitely have brush strokes then. No doubt about it. Dry paint does not self-level at all. I know some people have some tricks to fix that. I have not learned those. I just stay away from doing it personally. So we are going to let this dry, and we will come back to it, and we'll put on a second coat, and maybe even a third coat. Who knows? But biggest thing is, your first coat, do not freak out if it doesn't look good. I've never had a base coat or a first coat look good. I don't know if anybody has. Maybe some expert brush painters out there have done it. That's awesome. Kudos to you. I have not. But that's just me. So anyways, be right back. Once you're comfortable with the paint, you think it's tacked up enough, or it's dry, it should at least be dry to the touch. At the very least. And it's not going to come off. You basically do the exact same thing again. Take the paint, get thin it down, or whatever you're going to do, and you just go over it again. Your second time, you can be a little more deliberate, trying to get nice even strokes. You should see it covering a lot better, because you're basically going over the same color. You're just kind of filling in the thin spots. Not a whole lot more to say on that. So rather than sit here and yammer on and have you watch me do this whole thing again, I'm basically just going to do exactly what you see me doing, which is going over this with another coat, and we'll see what it looks like when it's done. So be back in a minute. So now that the second coat is done, just kind of, what I tend to do is just take a quick look around, see if there's any spots that might need a little touching up. Overall, it's not too bad, but there's a few spots here, there, a couple spots that just need a little bit touching up. So that's what we're gonna do. We're basically gonna do the exact same thing. Take the same color. We don't need a lot of paint. We don't even need a lot of thinner. Take a couple drops of paint and a couple drops of thinner to get that nice thin consistency again. And just gonna touch up those few areas. Don't have to paint the entire thing again. Just cover the spots that need a little touch up. That's all. Bit here. And some in the back here. Now, if you're going to weather this, which the plan is to go through the painting on this now. Next video, I'll do decaling, and then for a final video, I'll be weathering it. If you don't plan on weathering it, that's fine. That's perfectly okay. A lot of people do clean builds. I'll do them from time to time. But because I do plan on weathering it, you don't have to be quite so worried, because the weathering is going to kind of blend everything together. And in fact, may even hide some of it to a degree, especially in here. You don't have dirt and stuff in there, so you're really not going to see anything. And I think, oops, a little bit of the front. And if I'm getting down to the bottom, I'll just thin out the little bit that's in the tin rather than waste a whole bunch of paint. Just kind of reactivate that, get that going. This up here, and I think we're looking pretty good. So I'm going to just let this dry, and then we'll move on to painting some of the details. So now we're going to start getting into some of the detail, and it's very much the same process. At least I use the same process. Whatever paint I'm going to use, I try to thin it down a little bit so it flows a little better. This to me is really important on the smaller details, because you really want the paint to flow off the brush without much work or coercion or teasing it in there. Thicker paint, you'll find you end up having to brush more, and it's just not good. So the more the paint flows, the easier it is just to cover in a couple swipes, rather than having to go over it and over it and over it. Now, for detail like this, I do use, it's not a large brush, but it does have a point. Makes it easier to get into some of the stuff without getting it all over everything. Just go over it. Now, if you do get some in there, you can always move the paint to another area, and then go back in with your brush. Get some of the excess out before it dries, of course. And just work the whole thing. Now, I'm not doing any fancy painting here. I'm kind of keeping this basic. I'm using a tire black. You can use a regular black, whatever you have. I like the tire black just because it looks a little more realistic or worn to me. That's just my opinion. Some people really like the black. This one is actually by Vallejo. Where did I put it? This is by Vallejo. This one's actually an air color, so it's meant for airbrushing, so it's actually pretty thin already on its own. I don't have to paint this one much. So I'm going to finish painting this up, and then we'll come back and talk about tracks, okay? See you in a minute. Okay, so now we're going to get to the running gear. Now again, this one is a personal preference. Like I said, I tend to assemble the whole model and then paint it in place. There's a lot of people who really prefer leaving the tracks off and painting everything before putting the tracks on. There's even some people who will not even put the road wheels on, and they'll paint the whole chassis. They'll paint the wheels off the model and then assemble. It's just it's purely personal preference. There's no right way. Some people have strong opinions about it. I don't. However you want to do it, knock yourself out, because that's the whole point, right? Whatever lets you get the most enjoyment out of it. Same thing, I'm going to use the tire black. And it's just I like to keep it nice and thin, so it just flows nicely onto the surface. I don't have to fight it. I don't have to push it around. Thicker paint, well, tends to go on thicker and doesn't lay down as well. I'll finish that up later. When it comes to like the inside, again, this is where the smaller pointed brush comes in handy. I can really get in here, paint the stuff. Works out pretty well. again, yeah, I can see how it would be a lot easier doing this off for some people. Maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment. I don't know. Now, with the black on the wheel itself, this brush actually might be too big. So I will go to a smaller brush, but again, I want to have as much of a nice little point on it as I can have, because it's really kind of tiny. And this is where a steady hand comes in handy, and don't be afraid to make a mistake, because it can happen. It happens to me like that. That's what you want to do. Happens to me all the time. And what you can do is, it's just paint. So if you do get somewhere you don't want it, if you get to it soon enough, you can just rub it off with your finger, and it'll usually come right off. If not, you just go over the area with the right color. So if I happen to get some of this on the rim, then I will just go back over it with the green and be done with it. And I'll keep turning at different angles to get to the, different areas easier. I'm going to stop babbling, and I'm going to finish painting these up. And in the magic of editing, we'll be back in just a second, and we'll do the tools in the back. Now that we have all of our tracks and running gear done, we can take a quick look over, see if there's anything else you might need to want to touch up. Again, I personally am not overly concerned with exactness, because I'm going to be weathering it, and weathering will, believe it or not, kind of blend things together and hide a lot of weaknesses. But if you're building a clean, or if I were to be building this as a clean paint job, then I definitely would be taking way more extra careful time. But you don't want to be messy. You don't want to be just slapping paint all over the place. But don't stress it. Don't stress if you get a little bit not where you want it, or a little bit where you want it. Again, especially not being a hand painter, it's going to happen. And the more you do it, the more I do it, the less that'll happen. So be kind to yourself. Catch yourself a break if your first time or second time isn't a perfect paint job. The whole idea is to give it a shot and to try and to learn from it, really. So now we're just going to paint up the details on the back. And for that, I'm using a natural steel by AK. Often I'll use a gunmetal, and typically I would also paint the metal parts black first, and then kind of dry brush or scatter brush steel over it to give it a worn look. But again, because we're starting from a relatively clean look, I'm just going to go with the steel and then a very basic wood color. So I basically did the same thing. I'm going to take the paint, add a couple of drops of the thinner to make it flow a little better. Get all the excess off. And then just carefully go in here and paint it up. Really, part of the trick that I have found is don't look at it as painting a small thing or you're painting a big thing. You're painting a thing. And the size really doesn't matter, because the techniques are really kind of the same. The only thing you might need is maybe a little more hand steadiness, the smaller parts. But again, that will all come with practice. Now, if for some reason you seem to have shaky fingers, there's different ways you can do it. I like to plant my hand at least as much as I can on the desk. You can also, use another hand to steady yourself. And there are tools like sticks and things like that to help steady yourself. But really, in most cases, it's just practice. It's finding a place that your hand is comfortable, that you can reach everywhere you want to go relatively easy. You don't want to be in weird angles, as little as you can. Sometimes it's going to happen. You'll have to deal with it, but for the most part, you just find the angles that work. And part of that is where your hand is comfortable, as well as where you can see. Do not minimize vision lane. If you're covering up and painting, I mean, it may sound obvious, but some positions you're almost obscuring what you're painting. You really want to make sure you get it in a spot where you can comfortably lay the brush and really see what it is you're working on. And again, if you get paint where you don't want it, or you get paint somewhere that it's not supposed to be, you can always just go in and touch it up after the fact. Brushes. I'm not holding a point I like. Because it's getting grayed. Well, I'll make do. Don't worry about that later. For the finer stuff, you do want a decent brush. You don't need to go buy, an expensive $50 detail brush or anything like that. You do want something small. Comes to a point. Some people really like to use really tiny. I think they're way too small. Let's see if I have one here. Some people like to use a brush like this. Oops. As you can see, it is very tiny. I used to do that, and I found I didn't have as much control. And it seemed kind of counterintuitive. But I found if I got a longer bristle, point was what mattered. And as long as I had the point, I had control. So we basically just keep moving around tool to tool. I know I'm kind of blabbing, so we'll just finish this up. Now I'll move on to the wood. Catch you in a minute. So for wood handles, you kind of have a range of possibilities. You can use earth colors, even though it's dirt or earth or whatever. It's brown, and wood's brown, so you can do that. You can also buy specific paints that are wood. You can get a wood color, a wood base color. I often will use a cork. You can get mahoganies, red browns, really anything that's a wood tone. Don't get too hung up on the label or the name on the paint. As long as the color works, the color's right, you're good to go. In this case, I am going to use a cork. One of my go-to colors. Like I said, you don't have to get hung up on the name on it. Just because it's wood doesn't mean the color on the paint bottle has to say it's wood. Technique is the same. Thin the paint just a hair. Get in there. And paint it down. Sure what else to say at this point. Like I said, doesn't matter what you're painting, what color you're painting, what object you're painting, the size that you're painting. Techniques are all the same. For me, at least. You pick your paint, thin it to a good consistency so it flows. Take your time. And go back in again and touch up spots that are messed up. Touch up spots that you missed, for example. I just see I missed a metal. So now I'm going to go in there and I'm going to touch that up. Get that part that I missed. I got a little bit of wood where I didn't want it here. I'm going to clean that up a little. There we go. Tools are done. And that is really it for a basic paint job. So, like I said, that's how I do it. Now, you can go out there and find tons of videos and write-ups and explanations of different and various ways to do it. So it works well for some people or it doesn't work for others. That's the nice thing about this hobby. There is no one right answer for most things. I would say the majority of the things, there's no one right answer. The right answer is the one that works for you. So, hope you enjoyed that. I'm really not no one's going to sign me up for a TED Talk. I'm definitely not the best presenter, but hopefully I was able to help some of you. And you can see that with a very little bit of work, you can actually have a decent paint job with a brush. Next, you'll notice there's no markings. So the next video that I'll be putting together shortly after this will be how to apply decals. Believe it or not, there's many different ways you can do it. Again, no one right way, so I will go through and show several ways to apply decals, and then you can do with that information as you will. If that interests you, or if you think you might want to check that out, please, by all means, hit the subscribe button and watch for that. It'll be coming. All right, that's enough babbling. Took up enough of your time tonight. Get back to the bench, start building. And until later, happy modeling.